Awesome. Lonnie, so happy to have you on the Inside Scoop today. I'm really excited for the conversation because just few people know RevOps quite like you know RevOps from the history to where it's going.
Thanks, Janet. Super excited to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Of course. So I just at the start of the pod, I was like, RevOps. Tell me a little bit more about your background and experience because you've been in RevOps before people even called it RevOps.
Yeah, I appreciate that recognition for sure. So I've been leading revenue operations for 12 plus years, very focused on establishing and growing the teams, maturing the revenue engine specifically, and connecting the technological pieces to help penetrate markets and grow revenues. I've seen revenue operations, span from the early stage organizations, let's call it the 0 to 1, all the way to helping companies facilitate 100 plus million and going past Series D. So when used correctly and effectively, it's I think a secret weapon.
Types of companies should consider having this type of team. You mentioned 0 to 1, you mentioned Series D. How big can you go?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I really like that question because I was just, saying prior to this conversation, I spoke with another founder that just raised Series A who contacted me and was inquiring, hey, when should I bring RevOps in the organization? And I'm actually interviewing and looking for my first RevOps hire. And it's a common question because a lot of the times I think from a P&L standpoint, if you're sitting in the finance org, you're wondering like, is this a cost center or is this a revenue generating activity? Is this, what is the revenue per FTE for the organization, headcount, et cetera, budgeting and planning? And I think that you don't have to go full tilt, if you will, and say, okay, I'm going to establish an entire team. We're going to have 6 people. I think what you've got to do is take a step back and look at where the business is at. What is the level of clarity on the go-to-market motion? You're looking at your product, you're looking at your price, you're looking at your ICP, and all of those things in a lot of scenarios as the business matures is going to change. So I think bringing somebody in to answer your question very clearly early that has an understanding of revenue operations end to end and can really think through critically from the beginning of the customer blueprint or journey to the very end can add a lot of value early on. And it may not be that you're trying to dial in the full entire blueprint, but maybe you're just focusing on sales effectiveness, or maybe you're focusing on sales enablement, or maybe you're focusing on sales operations, or you're establishing or thinking through what technologies and infrastructure is going to be in place early on versus 5 years down the road, and you're collaborating with the product team and thinking about data governance and influencing decisions with data and how you want the different systems to talk. So I think the sooner the better, but I think it needs to be moderation in terms of the maturity, just like other departments typically would be housed.
That's a great point, and especially around things, maybe you don't need the full breadth of RevOps. Maybe you need parts of the sales enablement, parts of putting the company together. So especially the Series A, you kind of got your ICP, PMF, all those acronyms, but you're
Right.
the same thing, not in the same way as a Series D.
100%. And I think that there's the startup, there's the scale up, and as the times change, I think we'll probably get into AI, I imagine later. You have to be resilient and adaptive. So having somebody that is concentrated in that area, but maybe doing more or less of certain components of revenue operations can be a real win-win.
Here's another question. So we've talked a lot about kind of what size. There's a lot of, you know, eh, I'll say maybe FUD, like fear, uncertainty, like what is RevOps going in the environment? When do you need it? There's the CFO perspective, CMO perspective, CRO perspective, CEO perspective. I see CO, I could go on listening
Yeah.
to the acronym soup later. How do you think those different perspectives should influence what RevOps is? Knowing there's not, no company's going to have one right answer. You're going to have a different answer if you're a product-led growth versus a sales-led growth, Series A versus Series D versus a seed stage company where I'm kind of RevOps. And we're not big enough for a formal one yet. So how do you take all those perspectives in, acknowledge them? Well, how do you take them in? What are they? And how do you acknowledge them and kind of create that narrative around RevOps?
Yeah, so I think with that being said, that is a really, really, really great intro into, I think, the formation of how do you get a very clear job description, the
Mhm.
inputs, the outputs, the effectiveness, and where does that role drive impact. So I think at the early part of your conversation, what came to my mind and what I'm picking up on, Janet, is executive level alignment to say, what is everybody's concerns? What are their challenges? What are the metrics they're using? What is their core focus? What's keeping them up at night, if you will? And then making sure that there's alignment on some core definitions, nomenclature, and what needs to be achieved. And I think by doing that, you start to establish like what the gaps are in the business, and then you decide in a framework if that gap should live in a very verticalized function, such as finance, sales, maybe it's FP&A, maybe there's a marketing function. And then you've got this other area that's very, very, very focused on, end to end, all revenue generating activities. So the framework that I like to use specifically is people, process, systems, and tools. With that framework, I think now you start to fill up the bucket with these. Well, it doesn't fit perfectly there, and it doesn't fit perfectly there. And then now you've built that alignment. You start to build some framework, and then you can get down to the nuts and bolts of like, what is the focus? And now we can start tying revenue. We can start tying OKRs, KPIs, and then ladder back into the ultimate business objective for the short, medium, and long term.
That's a really great framework in order to think about things. And, you're not providing the answer, but it's these questions to think through. And I feel like that's so often what RevOps is doing. People sometimes think of it as, well, they created the dashboard. But what you're saying here is they're helping you engage in the conversation around what even should be on that dashboard.
100%. I think that's, you picked up on it beautifully and eloquently reiterated that it's all of the things I mentioned was a framework to get down to that exact answer. And then if we piggyback to your earlier question, when should we bring it in? I think that breakdown, that the framework that will start to answer that question of like, we need one person, maybe we need two. Or we know we need that when we get to X amount of volume, when we start to create silos because we're growing. But right now we don't have any. We're founder led, right? Or we're doing a lot of sales and by just the co-founders, it's et cetera. So there may not be kind of that need, but if somebody's not advising and thinking about that, then you could be running the risk of making decisions, building out frameworks and building out some disciplines that may get you from say 0 to 10 million, but it's not repeatable, scalable, or sustainable. So I think if we go back to every business is a little bit different. And as time goes on and the market is reacting to what you're putting out there, your ICP is changing, right? Your consumption model may be changing, your pricing model may be changing. So those are all the things that I think somebody in a RevOps role can really think through.
You have this perspective and you've advised, talked with so many different companies. You've seen them. You have, of course, founders reaching out to you for advice. How do I add in RevOps? I know you get formal requests to advise companies, and that's something a number of other people, A, might want at some point in their careers, or B, they get these requests and they're saying, how do I think through them? Who do I choose? So I'd love you to go, you've mentioned your RevOps framework. How do you think of your framework for advising companies? Who is,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely worth my time, and who is, you're not quite the right fit for me?
Yeah, so that, I mean, I think time is one of those infinite, those resources that we never get back, and it's everybody's trying to be as respectful and diligent with it as possible. In addition to my full-time roles, I've found so much value while being in a full-time role, complementing my experience and always being servant and trying to help others by listening to what other people are coming up against. Because you get this crowd source of information as either a validator. Oh yeah, that's a very common problem. Or, oh wow, that's a really unique situation, I haven't seen that, or I don't have that problem. But if I can help bring that question out and tease it out and figure out a framework or a solution or a technology or people or process, I'll be prepared for it, but then maybe I should be thinking about that in my full-time role, if you will. So I look a little bit of a couple different things. One is, is it a nascent new technology or function? And that's going to be kind of hard to do in the coming years, in my prediction, because there's a lot of coverage out there. And it seems that a lot of the times people are trying to kind of redo something that's out there. So I think what I try to dial in is what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Are you crystal clear on the problem? And what validation have you done already to know that this problem exists? And then start to look at like, okay, great. How are you thinking about solving that problem? Because now you're creating value. And if there's really a great match between that, there's a really, really big need or problem out there, and there's this value added approach to solving the problem, then now we have some level of product or service that I think is really worth expanding upon and exploring, and then start to talk about it. So those are things. So that's one component. The second component, Janet, is I really like to think through, is it something that I'm really passionate about? Do I use the
Mhm.
thing? Do I want to know more about it? Do I have the same problem? Is it in a sphere of expertise that I've experienced before? And that's important to me because I think passion is a huge driver to success. And then the third component I think is the interactions. When folks are approaching, I've been contacted by folks, or I reach out to folks and say, hey, can I learn more about this or something. And sometimes I think there's a growth mindset and a receptiveness to learning and managing that relationship where somebody will say, "Oh yeah, what do you think about this slide deck?" Or what do you think about this demo? Or what do you think here? And you give them feedback, and then they don't really take it, or they don't manage it. Great, thanks so much, Janet. I really appreciate that feedback. I'm gonna go work on this, and why don't we set a time I can get back to you? I'd love to know if this hit the mark or not. And I think having that reciprocation is also something that will help build that relationship. So those are three main components I sometimes will look for.
That's a great, you mentioned so many key things there, not just, all right, is this company going to make it or not, but how do I influence them and am I that right person?
100%. And sometimes it's like, I don't know much about that, but maybe I know someone that knows more.
Mhm.
Or I'm not really that close, or that's not that interesting to me. I don't know that I'm going to be able to add as much value. So I think I try to assess how much value I can bring to the relationship first before what can I receive from it.
So we've talked a lot about the foundations, how to look for roles, a lot about advising. All right, we're getting into the change aspect because we've got the foundation and now it hits 2022. We had this small little billion-dollar product launch, which I feel like, I don't know about you, I live in San Francisco. So December 2022, the only thing talked about at any holiday party was, have you tried ChatGPT?
Yeah.
Now, we're 2+ years after that. What impact, let's just start with the impact this has had on RevOps and go-to-market operations overall.
Yes, there's a lot of fits and starts um, in this arena or this topic. I think there's a couple different areas that we could explore, and one is fear. Frankly, is what is it going to do to jobs? One, right? If we talk about the fear category. Two, are we going to completely lose all human touch? And what is the authenticity and the effectiveness of these AI generated either responses or probes, and then three, is it even accurate? So let's call it like fear or feelings, right? And then I think with the AI, you also have just efficiencies. Like there
Mhm.
is already and going to continue to be these efficiencies gained as a result of being able to, I don't want to use the word automate, but to continue to execute things that humans have traditionally needed to either press a button or advance a stage or to do something. Um, and I'll come back to that second point. And then I think the third component is that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know because the general consensus hasn't been reached. I think that it has to continue to mature. There has to be a digestion period in which AI is used and put out there, and then people have to react. And
Mhm.
then after they react, they can say, how am I going to impact my pricing model? How is this going to influence my go-to-market motion? How is this going to influence the overall approach to what I'm doing? So going back to the fear of, a lot of people are getting responses or reach outs, et cetera, and it's just not accurate or it's just completely wrong. The timing's off. Like there's no EQ, if you will, time to it, which I think in fact is driving people to say, oh my gosh, like we should use it for certain things, but then there's other things like just stay away. We shouldn't use it. So I think it's going to equalize in a lot of ways some of the playing field when used effectively, because if we can automate certain tasks or things, and I'm just using things very loosely, use cases are going to be very, the breadth and depth of use cases is out there is huge. Then I think we can get it to be a little bit more relational and value based, and we can go back to solving real true problems and creating value and relationships as before we took on a very, let's say, a digitized approach to the selling motion. And
Mhm.
where the return on investment comes in is that we can create more time and effectiveness doing this value-based and relational-based selling because we're saving time gathering all of these other details or processes that were required to keep the relationship or the value-based sale, very true.
That's so true about keeping a lot of that human persona and keeping it about ultimately, unless AI runs the world, it's a tool and another mechanism to enhance overall what humans are doing and what humans' goals are.
100%. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of really great knowledge out there and perspectives, and I'm bullish on it. I think that there's phenomenal use cases for it. I think as far as bringing it into RevOps, there's a lot of time consuming things that if you can have a first layer to make a pass at something or to generate, frameworks, or, if we move from like low code, no code to AI, like there's a ton of really awesome use cases, and I'm excited as can be because these are the things that what make your days midnight or 2 a.m. because you're trying to go through and figure this out. So it's like great, so we can use it, and I think into for betterment in a lot of ways, especially on the RevOps side. Just have to, I think, be smart about it, and then the big thing that is now being talked about today, which I think is incredibly important, is process and data.
Mhm.
Is it's going to be as effective as the process is. If you don't have a repeatable process, you're back to square one. Like the AI is not going to solve that problem. And if the information that you're providing as a subset of making a decision or an outcome is poor or dirty, then you're back to the same problem as well. So I think those are good. So that's going to, I think, drive some influence too in the modeling of how people are focusing on the prioritization in the business. Like get our process down, get our data down.
What have been some of your favorite ways to learn more about AI? And one of the reasons I ask this is so many of us work from home, so I don't look over and see what my coworker's doing.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple really great classes that are coming out
Mhm.
that are really really great. I think that's one that I was looking at frankly this morning where I was like, hey, I would actually go sign up for this and take a 2-day course. That's one. Lots of reading, and then I think just going in there and poking around and trying to actually use the functions and try the new tools and utilities and go through there and try to do different prompts as well as seeing what the use cases are. Like, oh, let's try to do this and apply it in that use case. The other thing too to consider is just sometimes company landscape on using and sharing, right? Because of course that information is being collected. So what type of, either IP or other considerations, from a governance model needs to be thought through. So I think that's going to be something to consider too, is like how much of this, what are the controls and the safety checks around supplying the information to get the output that we're looking for.
Yep. And it's such a great point on just different classes, different ways to keep going. What's any favorite use cases that you've had?
I think right now I am, really interested in how AI can start to output like a quick first layer scrub on output of information. So how can we communicate information that relies on multiple platforms or databases or data sets and extract the data, A, and then B, put it into a digestible format for our audience. And by doing that, that gets me very excited because then I can say, great, like I've almost had someone do like step one, like the
Mhm.
first layer approach. Now I can go back and look at it and then use a strategic lens as well as understanding that end-to-end bow tie model or that blueprint and say, that doesn't make, something's wrong there. That doesn't make sense. Or I should double click on that. Or that's a great accurate data point, but I don't want to frame it that way because I don't think we need to look at it from a black and white scenario. I think we need to look at all the gray in between. So I'm going to frame that bullet point a little differently. So I think having that moderation of like first level or first layer being done for you is going, like, that's exciting to me because then I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, great. Like some of the like the I wouldn't say the heavy lifting is done, but like just what's the bare bones to get started. So your platform's set and in a very automated fashion. And I
That's
think, yeah, I think in the future, that's something where you'll be able to speak to a lot too.
right. Getting into the more of the you're coming off of me having just listened to every morning I listen to NPR, Wall Street Journal, all those podcasts. Today's from Wall Street Journal was, hey, AI should be, it was, might misquote it, but it was Wall Street says AI will impact 200,000 jobs this year. What's that mean for go-to-market?
I don't know.
Are we already
I don't
seeing
know
people
100%.
hiring less SDRs? Are we already seeing, like, have we started to see that, or are we, too much that's going to impact the giant tech behemoths before it gets to the startups?
Yeah,
Because
I think I think we need to think about it from the lens of, is it going to decrease, but is it also going to increase? Is it going to create new industries as well?
Mhm.
Is it going to create new marketplaces? Is it going to create new products? Is it going to create the need for different levels of governance? I think it's going to impact jobs without a doubt. I mean, I think that's a valid statistic. I don't want to, challenge that, but I think if we can work together, collectively for what it can benefit too. So I think it's going to influence it. It'll change, right? It's we're going to develop new muscles, a new expertise, and it's going to influence things, just as other revolutions have. And I think probably on the larger company, to your point, it's going to be probably more adapted and adopted easier because those companies probably have a lot more rigor and discipline and definition and processes that are followed like day in, day out that are more automatable. Or there may be larger data banks of information that where they can gather intelligence and then make, very, very precise decisions to the use cases.
Mhm.
But I think that'll definitely trickle in, sooner than later for sure. But I think I'm looking more on the positive outlook of what's it going to create.
And any thoughts on what you've seen it already start to create?
I think it's created some areas for people to be experts in,
Mhm.
frankly, and to generate their level of expertise and use cases. But I also think it's created a lot of noise, where people are racing to embed it into product, but it's not really even AI. It's just it's a wrapper in some regards, and it's not necessarily doing what AI is capable of, but it's a trendy term to use. So people are racing to embed it, but that's where the danger starts.
Sorry, you said trendy, and I had to dive in. Thoughts and agentics use cases, so essentially AI agents.
My biggest thing is the applicability and the effectiveness of that EQ, the timing of when. I think people like to buy from people and they like to sell to people, and I think it's an emotional experience.
Mhm.
And people now are it's yes, transactions are quick, but value is never going to not want to either. That is where I think it got a little bumpy at the start of the conversation. Let's say in the last 9 months, it's like, oh, we don't need all these SDRs anymore. We're just going to have these, agents. And I'm like, I don't know. Does the buyer want that? And you read all times of posts and examples where it's just completely wrong and the mark is completely missed. And I think that risk could be detrimental to a company's persona.
So, as we've been talking about, we talked about a lot of these changes, what's going on with jobs. What should somebody who's job seeking search for when they're looking at a company in the realm of, I want to make sure I'm still functional for this role in 12 months? I don't think we can look in the decade long time scale, but also how do you choose which one?
Yeah, yeah. I think that so to start off with, I think the first part of the question, I think strategy and uh, technological understanding and effectiveness is like, merging because of the ability to utilize these tools and having the being very hands-on and technically inclined is going to continue to be important. And I think the ability to be strategic and where the secret is, like the in between, the secret sauce, if you will, is going to be is how effective are you at leading and executing by combining your strategy alongside of that technical aptitude. And leading up to today, and AI, I think, is bringing this out. Is it's been like I'm a strategy executionist or I'm a technological executionist. And I think now having the ability to bring those together is going to create value. So I think to your point, relevancy or staying relevant or adding value. A lot of people, I think, like to focus in one sphere or another. So I think that could be a competitive advantage, is being able to do both. But then we just go back to that infinite, or that resource of time. Or non-infinite, but it's can you do both all day, every day effectively? Not probably not, but maybe some. So then having an understanding, and then I think going back to EQ and being able to collaborate and having the soft skills to have an understanding, the ability to, optimize locally, you know what I mean, as well as globally in the sphere. Um, Going back to the second part of your question, I think p- people, impact, and purpose,
Mhm.
relational values, making sure and looking at roles where, hey, these are the people that we can win together, we can lose together, and really have a relational, value based um, model, with our relationship to grow and to move the business to the next chapter. I think impact, like what's the impact of the organization or the product or the service, and do I believe in that impact, and is that impact going to kind of fuel my core motivators and values. um, and then what's like the purpose, is there a real purpose here, or is this something that is just kind of there, right? And I think that those purpose-based companies, both holistically as well as in the marketplace, are the companies that are just going to shine and really have exponential growth. Is that there's going to be purpose behind what it does, but also like it's something that you need. Like there's definitely a gap in the marketplace, and it solves that gap. And I think as long as you're solving that gap and creating value, you'll continue to grow.
That's such a great point. So we started this with how did RevOps evolve in your background behind that? And it's all about the people and how RevOps is basically a system to help the executives get more out of what they're trying to do.
Optimization. You hit the nail on the head. I think that is one of the single most things is it's not a curation or a cure for something. It's saying we are an optimizer.
Mhm.
We can go in there and we can help make sense and turn, chaos into opportunity and optimize all of the different functions, process, people, and areas. It's not about breaking silos down. It's about optimization and maximizing potential and minimizing risk.
That's such a great point, Lonnie. And this has been fantastic. I hope for our listeners too that you've learned, from more about revenue operations to the different trends to as you're furthering your careers, what to look for as an advisor, what to look for in your next role, how to operate more effectively, and just what to think for as 2025. And then we've got 2026 coming up after that, and it will continue to change.
Without a doubt. Thanks for having me, Janet. I mean, this has been a ton of fun. I really enjoy, very passionate about these topics. Love everyone's perspectives. And, there's a lot of great people out there with a lot of this, wisdom that can, I think, add a lot of value in the sphere.
Well, thank you, everybody. This has been another episode of The Inside Scoop.